Human beings invented coupons, discount codes, and the beautiful little phrase, "I know a cheaper way." And these 10 lunatics used all three to speed run the dumbest endings imaginable. But tonight's legends took thrift to a level that should honestly qualify as a mental condition. These aren't unlucky people. These are 10 idiots willing to go full MMA with reality just to avoid paying $39.99. So buckle up, because tonight, cheap isn't smart. Cheap is just stupid wearing cargo shorts. 1. The dollar store pest control expert. Earl was the kind of man who viewed every professional service the same way, a personal insult with a price tag. Plumber? Scam. Electrician? Coward tax. Pest control? Basically organized extortion with khakis. In Earl's world, if another grown man showed up to his house with a truck, a clipboard, and a service fee, that was not help. That was a challenge. And Earl had never met a challenge he couldn't make dumber with tools from the garage. So when a giant wasp nest appeared under the front eave of his house, Earl did what all truly dangerous suburban men do. He stared at it for 30 straight seconds with his hands on his hips. That pose means something in America. It means a man has absolutely no idea what he's doing, but is seconds away from acting like he invented the problem and the solution. Now, the smart move here was obvious. Call pest control. Pay the fee. Let some trained lunatic in a bee suit handle it. But Earl heard the estimate, a completely normal amount of money for, "Please remove an airborne army from my house," and reacted like the company had asked for one of his kidneys and the deed to his truck. "Ain't no way I'm paying that," he said. "Of course not, Earl. Why spend money when you can gamble your bloodline against insects?" So he marched into the garage and started gathering supplies with the determined energy of a man building something that will absolutely be shown later in court.
1 can of extra hold hairspray, 1 barbecue lighter, 1 stepladder. No gloves, no face shield, no plan worth the name. He was about to fight a weaponized cloud of stingers with salon products and male audacity. That is not pest control. That is a TED Talk called How to Become a Neighborhood Memory. His wife took one look at the setup and did what women in these stories always do. She asked the only adult question in the room. "Why don't you just call someone?" Earl laughed, that stupid little laugh. That, "Relax, babe, I got this" laugh that has been directly responsible for half the strange noises in the suburbs since 1987. Because in Earl's head, this wasn't recklessness, this was efficiency. Why pay some guy $200 to spray chemicals when he could just go full dollar store dragon and incinerate the problem himself? He even explained it like it was science. Fire kills bugs. That was the whole thesis. Not exactly a peer-reviewed paper, but he seemed proud of it. So up the ladder he climbed, one hand gripping the hairspray, the other holding the lighter like he was about to cast a low-budget spell. He flicked the flame on, aimed the can at the nest, and pressed the nozzle. And for one unbelievably stupid, glorious second, it worked. A bright stream of fire shot outward, and Earl's face lit up with the joy of a man who had just confused immediate chaos with success. The nest sizzled, a few wasps dropped. He probably felt like an action hero, a shirtless patriot of terrible judgment, the John Wick of home maintenance, if John Wick had been raised in a tool shed and thought safety goggles were for Democrats. Then the rest of the wasps came out. Not confused, not impressed, enraged. Turns out when you set a flamethrower under a nest full of flying psychopaths, they do not politely die in place. They come out with purpose. Suddenly Earl wasn't conducting pest control anymore. He was standing on a ladder in gym shorts, holding a homemade fire cannon, while a black buzzing cloud of pure hatred boiled straight toward his face. That's when he panicked. And panic on a ladder is God's way of adding a second stupid idea to the first one. He flailed. The lighter dropped. The flame hit the siding. The ladder kicked sideways. Earl tried to climb down too fast, missed a rung, and came off the thing like a bag of wet groceries launched from a pickup bed. He hit the ground hard, rolled once, and immediately got swarmed by angry sky needles while the corner of his house started participating in the emergency. Neighbors later described the whole scene as a man losing a fight to both insects and property damage at the same time. Which is exactly what happened. Earl refused to pay for pest control.
So instead, he accidentally declared war on wasps, his own house, and several sections of the fire code, all to save a couple $100 and prove, once again, that in America, cheap isn't a budget strategy, it's a personality disorder with a ladder. 2. The spa on a budget visionary. Kevin was the kind of man who looked at luxury and immediately thought, there has to be a cheaper, dumber way to do this in my bathroom. Spa membership? Scam. Steam room package? Rich people nonsense. Professional wellness treatment? Absolutely not. Kevin was not about to pay grown adult money for hot air and moist vibes. Because in Kevin's deeply diseased little budget brain, relaxation was not something you purchased. It was something you built yourself with household appliances, misplaced confidence, and the kind of stubbornness that usually ends with emergency personnel speaking in calm voices. So one weekend, after seeing some overpriced spa ad featuring cucumbers, candles, and women who definitely had better credit than he did, Kevin decided he was going to create his own private steam room at home. Not in a smart way, not in a safe way, in a way that sounded like a challenge issued directly to thermodynamics. His chosen location? The bathroom. His chosen equipment? A giant stovetop pressure cooker, a portable hot plate, rolled up towels under the door, and the full emotional energy of a man who had watched half a tutorial and declared himself the Elon Musk of humidity. Now, a real steam room is designed by engineers. There's ventilation, heat control, pressure management, materials that do not immediately turn into crime scene adjectives. Kevin had none of that. Kevin had tile, a toilet, and a pressure cooker he treated like a wellness consultant. He dragged the cooker into the bathroom, filled it with water, set it on the hot plate, and stood back, admiring his setup like he had just revolutionized self-care for men who think Groupon is a personality. He even dimmed the lights a little. That detail kills me, because nothing says luxury like mood lighting next to a sink full of shaving stubble and a half-dead bottle of mouthwash. At first, everything seemed fine. The water heated up, steam started building, the bathroom got warmer. Kevin sat there, shirtless in a towel, eyes half closed, already mentally writing the speech he was going to give later about how people are sheep for paying spa prices. Then the pressure cooker started hissing. Now, to a normal person, that sound means the safety valve is working. It is literally the noise of disaster being politely prevented. To Kevin, however, it sounded annoying, too sharp, too loud. Not zen. It was ruining the atmosphere he was trying to create, which was apparently discount emperor sweating beside a toilet. So earlier during setup, Kevin had already decided to fix that problem the way only a truly elite idiot can. He glued the safety valve shut. Yes. He looked at the one part specifically designed to stop the cooker from becoming an angry metal bomb and said, "Actually, I don't love the vibe. That's not a home improvement decision. That's a direct threat against cookware." So there he sat, smiling in the thickening steam, fully convinced he had hacked the wellness industry. Meanwhile, inside that sealed steel pot, pressure was climbing like it had personal issues. Steam needs somewhere to go. That is not a preference. That is the entire arrangement. And Kevin, in his infinite budget wizard wisdom, had canceled the arrangement with glue. Then the cooker finally decided it had heard enough. The blast came fast and ugly. Not a little pop, not a gentle release. A full mechanical tantrum. The lid tore loose and launched across the bathroom like a cast-iron frisbee thrown by an angry god of cheap men. The hot plate tipped, steam exploded outward, towels flew. The whole room instantly went from DIY spa to landlord on the phone. All of this because Kevin didn't want to pay for a steam room. He tried to build luxury with cookware and male delusion, and instead created the world's most aggressive wellness package. 1 part humidity, 1 part pressure, and 100% proof that being cheap is just stupidity wearing a bath towel. 3. The motel snack gladiator. Randy was drunk in that very specific American way, where a man stops being a citizen and starts becoming a maintenance issue. It was 3 in the morning, he was standing in the fluorescent hallway of a cheap roadside motel, and his entire personality had narrowed down to one sacred mission: getting a bag of vending machine chips. Not food in general, not survival, not dignity, just those chips. In Randy's beer-soaked brain, they weren't a snack anymore.
They were destiny in foil packaging. Now, a normal person in this situation has options. Go to sleep. Drink water. Eat the complimentary ice bucket if things are really dark. But Randy wasn't operating from the regular human menu. He was operating from that dangerous mental zone where inconvenience feels like oppression and every machine becomes the federal government. He reached into his pockets. Nothing. Checked again. Still nothing. No dollar bills, no quarters, not even one sad little coin covered in lint and shame. And the second Randy realized he didn't have the $1.50 for the chips, he took it personally. Like the vending machine had looked him in the eye and said, "Not tonight, loser." That machine, by the way, had done absolutely nothing wrong. It was just standing there, lit up and minding its own business, full of candy bars, crackers, and tiny bags of bad decisions. But Randy looked at it and saw an enemy, a glass-fronted dictator, a midnight tyrant blocking his path to processed potato salvation. So he decided to break in. Not with tools, not with strategy, with vibes, blunt force, and a head full of domestic beer. At first he tried kicking it. That's basic drunk man diplomacy. A few angry boots to the lower panel, like maybe the machine would suddenly respect him as a negotiator. It did not. The machine barely moved. Because vending machines, unlike Randy, are designed with the assumption that some idiot is eventually going to lose a fight with one. That should have been the end of it, but then Randy made the worst executive decision of his entire biological run. He decided to use his forehead. That's right. This grown man looked at a reinforced vending machine window and thought, "I bet my skull has more to say." Now, that front panel wasn't regular glass. It was thick polycarbonate, built specifically to survive punches, kicks, tantrums, and men who smell like motel carpet and regret. But Randy, by this point, was too drunk to understand material science. He planted his feet, grabbed the sides of the machine for leverage, and started headbutting it like a depressed ram with snack-related trauma. Thud. Then again. Thud. Then harder. Because that's how idiots interpret resistance, not as a warning to stop, but as a reason to become more physical. For a while, the machine held. Then a small crack appeared in the panel, and that was catastrophic. Because hope is the most dangerous drug a drunk man can take at 3 in the morning. The second Randy saw that little fracture, he lit up like he'd just discovered oil. He stepped back, tightened his grip, and charged in for one final, glorious, uninsured headbutt. The panel gave. His head went straight through. For one majestic half-second, Randy won. His face was inside the vending machine, floating among candy bars like a drunken woodland creature who had finally found heaven. But then instinct kicked in. He panicked and yanked backward without thinking about the jagged edge he'd just created. And that was that. All of this, over $1.50. Randy didn't lose to hunger. He didn't lose to poverty. He lost a late-night cage match to a snack cabinet because he genuinely believed his forehead was a valid form of payment. 4. The ladder rental revolutionary. Dale was the kind of man who treated every minor household expense like a hostage negotiation. $30 for a ladder rental? Highway robbery. $40 for a handyman? Communism with a receipt. Professional-grade equipment? Nice try, Big Ladder. So when his gutters clogged up with leaves, mystery sludge, and what was probably the remains of 3 separate bird-based bad decisions, Dale decided he was going to handle it himself. Not because he was handy, not because he had a plan, but because the hardware store wanted money, and Dale would rather physically challenge gravity than let another grown man profit off a ladder. Now, a normal person sees 2-story house and roofline maintenance and immediately understands that height plus stupidity equals paperwork. But Dale had the confidence of a man who had survived previous bad ideas and mistaken that for skill. His wife suggested renting the right ladder. Dale scoffed. Why would I pay for something I can rig up myself? That sentence should automatically summon paramedics, because what Dale called rigging something up was not engineering, it was a garage sale trying to become a staircase. He dragged 2 plastic patio chairs over to the side of the house, flipped an old paint bucket upside down between them, slapped a warped plank across the top, and stood back admiring it like he had just invented architecture for people banned from common sense.
This was not a ladder. This was a hate crime against balance. And somehow, it got worse. Because the ground under the whole setup wasn't even level. One chair sat half on the driveway, half in the grass, which meant the foundation of his little budget Eiffel Tower was already arguing with itself before his body weight entered the conversation. But Dale didn't care. He gave the plank one little bounce test, nodded like an idiot, and announced, "Solid." No, Dale. Stable things do not wobble like a folding table at a church potluck. Still, up he went. One sneaker on the chair, one on the plank, both hands gripping the gutter like he was storming Normandy for wet leaves. And for a brief, miraculous moment, it almost worked. He reached in, scooped out a handful of gutter sludge, and probably felt like the smartest man in the county. You could already see the speech forming in his head. See? Didn't need to rent anything. People just waste money because they're scared. That's the problem with cheap men. The second a stupid plan works for 4 seconds, they start acting like Benjamin Franklin with a tool belt. So Dale leaned farther, then farther, because there was one stubborn clog just out of reach, and he was not about to climb down and reposition his homemade spinal betrayal. That would have meant admitting the setup had limits, and cheap men would rather lose circulation than admit a setup has limits. Then the bucket cracked. Just a little at first. A sad little plastic death cough. Dale froze. The chairs shifted. The plank rolled. And suddenly his entire do-it-yourself ladder alternative became what engineers technically refer to as a complete joke. The whole thing came apart in stages, which is honestly the funniest part. First the bucket buckled. Then one chair kicked outward. Then the plank shot sideways like it had finally decided it wanted no part of this bloodline. Dale pinwheeled in the air for one horrifying second, still clutching a handful of gutter slime like that was somehow going to help. It did not. All of this, over $30. Dale didn't fall because ladders are expensive. He fell because he looked at a totally normal rental fee and decided to build his own relationship-ending jungle gym out of patio furniture, a bucket, and delusion. He tried to save money on a ladder. Instead, he found out gravity rents itself out for free. 5. The DIY Tow Truck Patriot. Ronnie was the kind of man who viewed towing fees the same way medieval peasants viewed plague. Unfair, personal, probably a scam. So when his dead pickup truck gave up in the driveway one humid Saturday afternoon, Ronnie didn't see a mechanical problem. He saw an economic insult. The tow company quoted him $85 just to drag the truck 20 minutes to a shop, and Ronnie reacted like they had asked him to donate a kidney and clap while doing it.
$85? He barked. For a pull?
Yes, Ronnie, that is generally how towing works. You pay a guy with equipment, knowledge, insurance, and a truck built for towing to move your broken truck. But Ronnie did not respect professions that required licenses. In his deeply patriotic little brain, every problem could be solved with rope, horsepower, and being louder than the problem. So instead of calling the tow truck, Ronnie came up with a better idea, which is exactly how stores like this earn their own weather system. He was going to tow the dead pickup himself, with his other pickup. Now, if you're wondering whether Ronnie owned a proper tow strap, safety chains, a dolly, or even the basic emotional maturity to admit this was a terrible plan, the answer is no across the board. What he did have was an old chain from the garage, a rusted hook of uncertain origin, and a cousin named Bobby who was just dumb enough to be useful. That's important. Every great American disaster needs a Bobby. Ronnie backed truck number 1 up to truck number 2 like he was directing a military evacuation from a Walmart parking lot. The chain was too short, too old, and looked like it had spent the last decade losing arguments with rainwater. But Ronnie gave it one tug and declared, "That ain't going nowhere." That sentence, by the way, has been the opening prayer of countless disasters. His wife came outside, took one look at this Dollar General tow operation, and asked the most reasonable question anybody would ask that day. "Why don't you just pay the tow truck?" Ronnie laughed. That dangerous little man laugh. The one that means reality is about to put on steel toe boots. Because I'm not paying some idiot to do what I can do myself. A powerful statement from a man currently attaching 2 vehicles with a chain that looked like it had lost custody of its own integrity. So Ronnie climbed into the front truck. Bobby got in the dead one to steer. Already, this is art.
Because Bobby had no brakes, no power steering worth a damn, and absolutely no business being part of any plan involving moving metal. But there he sat, one hand on the wheel, wearing the expression of a man who had agreed to something without ever once asking what the backup plan was. Ronnie put the truck in drive and eased forward. For one glorious, stupid little moment, it worked. The dead pickup moved. Bobby gave a thumbs up out the window. Ronnie grinned like he'd just solved transportation. You could feel the speech brewing in his chest already. That's how real men do it. Save money, use your brain, problem solved. That was the moment the universe decided to collect. Because towing is not just pulling. There are things called weight, tension, momentum, and the very important detail that when one truck suddenly jerks and the other one doesn't respond cleanly, all that force has to go somewhere.
And where it went, unfortunately, was straight into the chain. The old hook snapped loose with the energy of a divorce finalized at gunpoint. 1 second, Bobby was being gently dragged down the driveway. The next, he was free. Free in a dead pickup rolling downhill with no proper control, no real braking, and a rapidly changing opinion of Ronnie's mechanical genius. The truck veered, bounced over the curb, clipped the mailbox, and introduced itself to the neighbor's decorative stone wall with all the grace of a refrigerator falling down church steps. All of this because Ronnie didn't want to pay $85. He tried to save on a tow fee and ended up proving, once again, that cheap men don't hate spending money, they just prefer to pay in chaos. 6. The discount tree surgeon. Marty was the kind of man who believed tree service quotes were part of a nationwide conspiracy against dudes with pickup trucks. $200 to remove a giant branch? Criminal. $300 if they haul it away. That's not landscaping. That's oppression with a chainsaw. So when a huge dead limb started hanging over his backyard, Marty did what every suburban man with too much confidence and not enough respect for wood tension eventually does. He decided he was basically a certified arborist because he owned gloves and had once watched half a logging show on cable. Now, a real tree crew shows up with ropes, helmets, harnesses, a plan, and at least one guy whose job is understanding what the tree is about to do before it does it. Marty had none of that. Marty had a chainsaw, a faded baseball cap, a tow rope, and a friend named Dwayne whose entire contribution to safety was saying, "I think you got it, man." That is not a team. That is a support group for future regret. Marty's idea was simple in the way all lethal ideas are simple. He would tie one end of a rope to the giant branch, the other end to his pickup truck, make a cut with the chainsaw, and then have Dwayne give it a little pull so the limb would come down exactly where he wanted. And when I say exactly where he wanted, I mean wherever his imagination had told him trees go when men point at them. Because trees are funny like that. They're not furniture. They don't politely obey drunk geometry. They're full of weight, tension, twist, and hidden chaos. Basically nature's version of a lawsuit waiting inside bark. But Marty was feeling invincible. He stood in the yard with both hands on his hips, staring up at the branch like a man about to teach the forest a lesson in budget management. His wife came outside, took one look at the setup, and asked the sort of question women in these stories always ask 5 minutes before disaster. "Why don't you just call the tree guys?" Marty snorted. "Because I'm not paying some clown $300 to cut one branch." Right. Why pay professionals when you can involve a chainsaw, a truck, and a man named Dwayne who thinks chewing sunflower seeds counts as emergency preparedness? So the rope went up. Dwayne climbed into the pickup. Marty fired up the chainsaw. And suddenly, the backyard had the energy of a county fair ride that hadn't passed inspection since Reagan. Marty started cutting. At first, everything looked great. Sawdust flying, branch groaning, Dwayne revving the truck like he was helping launch a boat instead of assisting in an open-air experiment on male stupidity. Marty probably felt incredible. This is always the dangerous part. That brief moment when a dumb plan works just enough to make the idiot feel chosen. Then the branch shifted. Not down, sideways. Because trees do not care about your budget. The cut had released tension in a way Marty did not understand, which was all the more impressive because he understood none of it. The branch twisted, the rope snapped tight, the truck jerked, and Dwayne, bless his useless heart, hit the gas harder because somewhere in his brain he thought more chaos might solve the first chaos. It did not. The limb came free all at once, whipping around like a giant wooden alligator with rent due. It didn't fall neatly into the yard. It swung, bounced, clipped the fence, smacked the side of the truck, and turned Marty's careful, money-saving plan into a live demonstration of why trees charge consultation fees. All of this because he didn't want to pay the tree guys. Marty tried to save a few $100 and ended up discovering that when you outsource forestry to ego, the bill still comes due. It just arrives shaped like a branch and moving way too fast. 7. The meat smoker. Chemist Doug was the kind of man who believed three things with his whole chest: professionals are overpriced, warning labels are written by cowards, and anything on earth can become barbecue equipment if you stare at it long enough with a wrench. So when he decided he wanted a custom backyard smoker, Doug did not do what normal people do, which is save up, buy one, and continue living in peace. No, Doug wanted to build his own because apparently brisket tastes better when seasoned with ego and a complete disrespect for chemistry. Then he found the holy grail of bad ideas, an old industrial propane tank. Most people look at a giant steel cylinder that used to hold highly flammable gas and think, that seems like an object I should leave alone forever. Doug looked at it and saw ribs, pulled pork, maybe a little mesquite chicken. In his mind, this wasn't a rusted pressure vessel, it was potential. It was destiny in metal form. And best of all, it was free. That is catnip for a cheap man. So he dragged the tank into his driveway, cracked open a beer, and started explaining the project to everyone within earshot like he was hosting a cooking show for the recently concussed. The plan was simple, which is how you know it was doomed. He would open the valve, let the propane air out for a while, then cut a nice little door into the side with a plasma cutter. That was the safety procedure. Air it out, not purge it, not flush it, not wash it professionally, just let the vibes escape. Doug's wife came outside, saw the tank, saw the plasma cutter, saw the beer, and immediately understood she was looking at the male version of a gender reveal fire. She asked if maybe, just maybe, he should let someone who actually understood gas tanks deal with it. Doug laughed. That laugh again. That suburban little, relax, sweetheart chuckle that has destroyed sheds, trampolines, boats, and at least 6 marriages per county. Nah, he said. It's empty. No, Doug, it was used. Different word. Important difference. See, propane is heavier than air. It doesn't just float up and wander off like a cartoon ghost. It sinks. It hangs around. It settles into the bottom of containers like a patient little chemical ambush, waiting for one loud idiot with a cutting tool to ruin the afternoon. Doug did not know this because Doug's entire science background was basically, well, I'm still alive, aren't I? So after letting the tank sit for an hour, which to him apparently counted as a doctorate in gas management, he put on a face shield, fired up the plasma cutter, and got to work. Sparks flew. Metal hissed. Doug was having a blast, which was unfortunately an extremely accurate phrase. For a moment, he looked thrilled. You know that face men make when they are absolutely not qualified for what they're doing but love the noise too much to stop? He had that face. That, I should have had my own show on cable in 2007 face. Then the cutter punched through. One tiny hot spark dropped inside the tank, and chemistry, which had been sitting quietly in the corner like an underpaid bouncer, finally stood up. The vapor ignited instantly. The tank didn't become a smoker, it became a message, a giant steel obituary draft written by the periodic table. The explosion blew outward through the fresh cut with all the grace of a freight train hitting a fireworks stand. Tools jumped, windows rattled. Somewhere down the block, a dog probably converted to a new religion. All of this because Doug wanted barbecue on a budget. He didn't save money, he just asked science to spot him a favor. And science responded the way it always does when a cheap man picks a fight with chemistry. Loudly. 8. The Christmas Light Dictator. Gary was the kind of suburban man who treated Christmas decorations like a military occupation. Not a tradition, not a hobby, a campaign. He didn't want festive, he didn't want cozy. He wanted his house to look like Santa had gotten divorced, hit the casino, and come back with a personal vendetta against darkness. Every December, while normal people hung one respectable string of lights and called it a night, Gary turned his front yard into a hostage situation for the local power grid. And this year, he had a goal. He was going to beat the Hendersons across the street. That's it. That was the whole disease. Because the Hendersons had a nice display. Classy, symmetrical, tasteful. The kind of Christmas setup that says, "We own matching napkins and refill the ice trays." Gary hated them for it. Not openly, not in a healthy way, but deep in his soul, where petty suburban rivalries ferment into madness. So when his wife suggested maybe keeping it simple this year, Gary reacted like she had proposed surrendering to the British. "Simple doesn't win," he said. "No, Gary. Simple doesn't set your yard up to be visible from low-flying aircraft either." Now, a sane person doing a giant light display would use proper outdoor wiring, separate circuits, load management, maybe even an electrician. Gary had a much more American system: extension cords, power strips, adapters, and the emotional stability of a man who thinks watching 3 YouTube videos means he now works for the electric company. He started with the roofline, then the bushes, then the mailbox, then a plastic sleigh, 2 reindeer, 6 candy canes, 1 inflatable Santa, a glowing nativity set, and, for reasons known only to God and untreated competitiveness, a light-up snowman holding a sign that said "Joy," like the yard wasn't actively developing a felony. By day 3, the front lawn looked like Christmas had crashed into a truck stop. Cords everywhere, splitters hanging off splitters, adapters plugged into plugs, plugged into cords, plugged into what I can only describe as an electrical lasagna of pure suburban delusion. His wife came outside, took one look at the glowing spaghetti monster climbing the front porch, and asked the only adult question left in the county. "Is all of that safe?" Gary laughed. That laugh. That "relax, honey" laugh that has started more domestic disasters than tequila and home equity loans combined. "Of course it's safe," he said, in the exact tone of a man who had just converted Christmas spirit into a pending insurance discussion. Then came the test run. Gary strutted over to the master switch setup, which was really just 3 cheap power strips zip-tied together like a manifesto, and flipped it on. And for one glorious second, it worked. The whole house lit up like Bethlehem during a rave, roofline blazing, reindeer glowing. Santa inflated and immediately looked like he regretted the assignment. The bushes shimmered. The nativity pulsed with enough wattage to make baby Jesus look like he was entering a boss battle. Gary stood there with his hands on his hips, chest out, soaking in the admiration of absolutely nobody who mattered. And that was the turning point. Because when a stupid plan works once, Gary types immediately take that as scientific proof they're visionaries. So he added more. More lights on the gutters, more lights on the tree, a projector, a second inflatable, then 1 more extension cord, because apparently at this point, he was just daring electricity to blink first. And electricity did what electricity always does when a man gets too smug around bargain bin hardware. It got personal. The cords heated up. One of the adapter blocks made that tiny, evil snapping sound that means you have crossed from holiday cheer into active consequences. Half the display flickered, then all of it strobed at once like Santa had opened a nightclub for divorced dads. Gary ran over, because of course when men create an electrical emergency, their first instinct is never turn it off. It's always poke it with confidence. All of this because he wanted to beat the Hendersons. Gary didn't decorate for Christmas. He challenged the power grid to a cage match in front of plastic reindeer, and lost exactly the way a cheap man should. Glowing, confused, and way too late to pretend this was ever about the holiday. 9. The beer elevator entrepreneur. Todd was the kind of man who treated stairs like a human rights violation. Not exercise, not architecture, a personal attack. Every weekend, he'd settle into his second-floor recliner with the full intention of having a few beers and watching the game. And every single time, reality hit him with the same cruel truth. The beer was downstairs. Now, a normal person solves that problem one of 2 ways. You buy a mini fridge, or, and I know this sounds extreme, you walk down the stairs like a mammal with a pulse. Todd rejected both, because buying a mini fridge cost money, and using his legs, in his view, was basically socialism. So he came up with a better idea, which is exactly how certain men end up as cautionary tales narrated by strangers. He was going to build a beer elevator, not buy one, build one. Because somewhere deep inside the American male brain is a goblin that hears the phrase minor inconvenience and immediately replies, "What if rope got involved?" Todd's plan was breathtaking in the worst possible way. He would rig a pulley from his upstairs window down to the patio using an old garage motor, some mystery cable, a plastic milk crate, and the sort of confidence only available to men who have survived previous stupidity and mistaken that for skill. He called it the brew lift. That right there should have gotten him banned from tools. For 2 full days, Todd worked on this thing like he was building the Panama Canal for alcoholics. He mounted a bracket into the upstairs window frame. He bolted the little motor to a board. He ran wire through 2 mismatched pulleys that he described as industrial, which in Todd language meant found near the shed and still mostly circular. Then he tied a milk crate to the cable and stood back to admire his invention like he was Steve Jobs, if Steve Jobs had spent most of his life smelling faintly like hot dogs and lawn clippings. His wife took one look at it and said, "Why don't you just get a mini fridge?" Todd laughed. That little man laugh. That you just don't understand genius laugh that has directly led to so many broken windows, emergency room copays, and insurance forms marked other. "A mini fridge costs money," he said. Right. Because apparently turning your second-story window into a bootleg freight terminal for Coors was the fiscally responsible option. Now here's the part that makes this story sing. The first test run worked. And that was catastrophic. Because one successful test is how cheap men start believing they've disrupted an industry. Todd loaded the crate with 6 cold beers, hit the motor, and watched that beautiful little box rise from the patio, like a gift from heaven to the least athletic man in the county. He was ecstatic. This wasn't just convenience anymore. This was proof. Proof that he was smarter than stairs, smarter than stores, and definitely smarter than his wife, who, at this point, had the exhausted expression of someone watching a raccoon learn accounting. And then Todd got greedy. 6 beers was not enough. If the brew lift could handle 6, why not 12? Maybe a bag of chips, too. Maybe a sandwich. Maybe a whole lazy man supply run. Because once a stupid invention works once, the next phase is always abuse. So Todd overloaded the crate, hit the switch, and gave the line a little yank to help it along, which is man language for, I am about to create a second problem to solve the first one. The bracket tore loose instantly. Not cracked, not loosened. Left. The crate swung sideways like a drunken pendulum, smashed through the window, and launched a dozen cans of beer into Todd's living room at ballistic speed. One hit the TV. One exploded against the ceiling fan. One caught him square in the face, hard enough to make the whole invention feel briefly self-aware. All of this because Todd didn't want to walk downstairs. He tried to save money, save steps, and outsmart gravity with a milk crate and garage junk. Instead, he discovered that laziness doesn't always pay for itself. Sometimes it bills you in aluminum. 10. The Backyard Fireworks VIP Package. Rick was the kind of American man who believed every holiday should end with at least one loud boom and a decision nobody could defend in court. Not celebrate, escalate. This was 4th of July, which meant Rick was already dressed like freedom had gotten drunk in a Home Depot parking lot. Tank top, cargo shorts, flip-flops, cheap beer, cheap sunglasses. The whole man looked like he smelled faintly of lighter fluid and had strong opinions about brisket, taxes, and government overreach in situations where nobody had asked. Now, most people enjoy fireworks the normal way, from a safe distance with a folding chair set way back in the yard, while quietly hoping no child loses a finger. But Rick didn't want to watch the fireworks. He wanted to experience them. That's the kind of sentence a man says right before the homeowners association gets involved. So instead of setting up with the sane people near the patio, Rick dragged his chair right up next to the homemade launch tubes. Not a little closer than he should have been. I mean close enough that if one shell sneezed, he'd feel it in his kneecaps. Then, because this man believed in comfort during bad decisions, he zip-tied a cooler full of beer to the side of the chair. That detail matters, because once a man turns a lawn chair into a seated explosives platform with drink storage, he is no longer celebrating Independence Day. He is actively trying to get commemorated by local news. Rick stepped back and admired the setup like he had just solved patriotism. In his head, he wasn't some guy in a backyard anymore. He was mission control. He was the commander of fireworks, the George Washington of poor risk assessment. His wife came outside, took one look at the chair parked 6 feet from amateur explosives, and asked the only adult question left in the neighborhood. "Why don't you sit back with everyone else?" Rick laughed. That laugh. That suburban little relax babe laugh that has personally injured more deck furniture than weather ever has. "Because this," he said, slapping the cooler, "is VIP seating." No, Rick, this was VGI seating. Very good insurance claim. Now the launch setup itself already looked suspicious. One tube leaned a little. Another was being stabilized by a brick, which is not engineering so much as arguing with gravity in public. The fuse line looked like it had been planned by 3 cousins and a case of beer. But Rick didn't care. He dropped into the chair, cracked open a can, leaned back, and told everyone, "Y'all are about to wish you thought of this." That sentence should have automatically triggered sirens. The first shell launched perfectly. Big boom, bright colors, crowd cheers. Second one? Also great. And that was the problem. Because 2 lucky fireworks is exactly how a stupid man starts thinking he and physics are in a committed relationship. So Rick leaned back farther, crossed one leg, and raised his beer like Caesar in flip-flops. Then shell number 3 fired sideways. Not up, not a little off, sideways, straight into the cooler. And suddenly Rick's patriotic throne detonated into a spray of beer, ice, aluminum, and instant regret. He jerked sideways. The chair folded halfway. One leg kicked a second launch tube, which rotated like it had finally decided to become a problem professionally. The next firework screamed across the yard at shin height, like a Roman candle possessed by child support rage. Now the whole backyard turned into a low-budget war documentary. One shell shot under the picnic table. Another blasted past the grill. Somebody dropped the tray of hot dogs and just left them there for history. An uncle dove behind a kiddie pool like he'd trained for this. And Rick? Rick was still tangled in the chair. That's the masterpiece. Not running, not helping. Just wrapped up in his own VIP package, like a sweaty patriotic pretzel, while fireworks strafed the suburbs around him. All of this because he wanted a better seat. Rick didn't celebrate freedom. He zip-tied it to a lawn chair, parked it next to explosives, and dared reality to blink first. Reality did not blink. So tonight we watched a man try to save on pest control by becoming a dollar store dragon, another genius turn a pressure cooker into a budget spa from hell, and one drunk motel philosopher attempt to buy chips with his forehead. Then came a guy who went to war with gravity over a ladder rental, a red-blooded patriot who saw an $85 tow fee and decided to improvise with chain, testosterone, and a cousin named Bobby, and a backyard lumberjack who learned that trees do not care about your budget. After that, we got a barbecue visionary who challenged propane to a duel, a Christmas dictator who tried to outshine the neighbors by fist-fighting the power grid, a man so lazy he built a beer elevator instead of walking downstairs, and finally Rick, the folding chair freedom goblin who turned 4th of July into a suburban artillery test. 10 people, 10 terrible shortcuts, and one shared religion. Why pay for the right way when I can absolutely ruin this for free? Now I need to know, who was the undisputed heavyweight champion of cheap, dumb nonsense tonight? Was it Earl with the hairspray flamethrower? Kevin and his steam-powered budget delusion? Doug trying to turn a propane tank into brisket destiny? Or Todd, who literally built a beer elevator because stairs hurt his feelings? Drop your top 3 cheapest idiots in the comments and defend your ranking like you're arguing over the last wing at a Super Bowl party. And while you're down there, confess the dumbest thing you almost did just to save money before your final surviving brain cell tackled you and saved your whole family tree. Because that's really the lesson here. Cheap isn't clever. Cheap isn't resourceful. And cheap definitely isn't brave.
Sometimes cheap is just a grown adult in cargo shorts standing in a driveway trying to negotiate with fire, electricity, pressure, or a ladder like reality takes coupons.